Hello, everyone, and welcome to A Conversation with Friends. I am Pastor Ivan Pitts here at the Second Baptist Church, and I am so honored to have a good friend and a servant of this county, Sheriff Don Barnes. Welcome.
Thank you. First, thanks for having me back to your church. I've always feel welcome here. I'm happy to be back.
It's a great honor. We are just excited for you to be here with us, and we know that this is a tough topic, and yet you come here open and prepared to answer questions. I want to start off by just letting you know that we're asking questions because we're curious, and we want to have information. We want to be informed. We're not here to say, I got you. We're not here to trick you, but we are here to be inspired by what you're doing for this county and how we can feel more safe and how we can collaborate together, because I simply believe that we are better together. There is no us and them, it's only us. And so that's the spirit by which we ask the questions here today. So just tell me, how does one become the sheriff of Orange County? What was that journey like, and why did you get into policing?
Wow, that's a loaded question. I just started my 34th year with the Orange County Sheriff's Department. I actually had a career before I started in the Sheriff's Department in policing. I was in real estate finance. For those who are old enough to remember Black Monday of '87, it was a very volatile time, and I wanted to have a more, maybe a different career, more of a servant-based, servant heart career. So I made this transition. I tell people I wanted a less stressful job, so I went into law enforcement. But it has been actually very fulfilling for me. I chose the Sheriff's Department specifically because of how broad the assignments were and how much opportunity there was within the Orange County Sheriff's Department. Much more now, actually, than there was back then, 34 years ago. It's grown as an organization significantly. You start in the jails, and you kind of work your way through a career, and I've had a very blessed career. I've never had a bad day. I love every day I've gone to work. I think that you create an environment that has your own happiness and fulfillment in it. If you look, you can find something positive in every day that you get to serve. The part of that question, though, which people may not be prepared for, is I never aspired to be the sheriff. I never saw this in my future. It's something that manifested over several years with my predecessor, Sheriff Sandra Hutchins, who passed away early last year, and she was probably the best boss that I ever worked for. She was just a phenomenal lady. Tremendous grace, tremendous humility, all the characteristics you'd want in somebody as a servant leader. And we'd had this conversation when she came in 2008, and every kind of so on after, and we got to be very close friends. We'd have lunch frequently, and she would sometimes ask, Don, do you ever think that maybe you might want to run for public office, maybe run for sheriff? And my answer was always the same, no. I don't have that interest. I have my exit strategy in my future, and you probably should look for somebody much younger and much more willing to put in many more years than I. Yeah. And this happened, and I promoted several times, and then right around 2015 or maybe 16, I was then the undersheriff, which is the second in command of the sheriff's department. We're having lunch one day, and she asked that question, would you ever think about maybe running for sheriff? And I told the same thing, no, and find somebody much younger and much more willing to put in more years than me. And she gave me the hand, said, Don, stop. I'm not going to run again. I think, and she said very flattering, complimentary things about me being the right guy, and it didn't persuade me at all. I was not persuaded by any of that. But then she said, and if you don't run, somebody from outside this organization will run, they will win, and they will run the place into the ground. And just like you have a family in your congregation here at Second Baptist, we have a family that we consider the Sheriff's Department, and they're all my friends. I had worked with them for 3 decades at that time. And I went home and talked to my wife, who said she never wanted this ever. In fact, she threatened me with divorce if I ever considered running. Oh. We're still married. We're having our 29th anniversary this weekend, so everything's still worked out. But I told her that conversation, and I said about what the sheriff had shared. And I said, I think I'm going to do it. I think I'm going to run. I don't think I could look myself in the mirror if I didn't strive to do better or make contributions for the betterment of the department and the community. And so I'm going to do it. To her credit, she looked at me and she said, I told you I never wanted this for us. I think it's going to be very detrimental upon our family and the demands that the job will have upon you. But I can tell you made your mind up, and I can't change it. You're my husband. I love you, and we're in. And that's when I started this journey. I'm here for at least 4.5 more years because I just won an uncontested election to remain as the sheriff. And I'll tell you, I'm proud of this organization. I'm proud of what we've accomplished and are accomplishing and continue to accomplish in some of the many diverse programs that we have. We're not perfect. No organization is. I think there are times when we have fallen short as an organization, but I think what people would expect of me or anybody in a leadership position in an organization, that when you identify issues, you investigate them, you hold people accountable, and sometimes that accountability means separating them from employment if necessary. You implement change to make sure things don't recur, and you strive to do better. And I think we've done a good job of making those corrective measures to put us in a much better place going forward.
Yeah. So just quickly, tell me, the Sheriff's Department of Orange County covers what percentage of Orange County, and what is the difference between the Sheriff's Department and the Police Department?
Sure. So the Orange County Sheriff's Department is a county. There's 58 counties in California. I'm one of the 58. We're the third most populous in California and the fifth or sixth most populous nationally. So it's a large organization. I think we get lost in the larger organizations up in LA County, LA Sheriff, LAPD, and even the LA FBI field office is very large. Orange County has 34 cities. Of the 34 cities, 13 of those cities are contracted with the Sheriff's Department to be their police agency. And when you add those populations up with the unincorporated area, we actually patrol or provide policing services for about 850,000 of Orange County's 3.2 million residents. So it's the largest policing department or police provider within the county of Orange in those 13 cities and those unincorporated areas. We have great contract partners. I have great relationships with the 21 municipal chiefs of police throughout the rest of the county. And I think what makes us a little unique, and this is not an LA, us, or anybody else, we just have a really good collaborative environment and relationships that we built. So when we address issues like homelessness, for example, maybe a decade or so ago, it would be punt the problem or squeeze the balloon in this population, move about the community from community to community. We have a mutual agreement that we are going to universally address this as one county issue, regardless where they are at that moment. And we're putting in great programs for outreach and connecting people to services and getting out of homelessness. A lot of these people are mentally ill. They have substance use issues. It's a combination of many things to deal with all of those in a triage format and then get them into sobriety or mental health stability, and most importantly, into housing when necessary, and kind of look at this problem holistically throughout the county, not from one jurisdiction to the next, because you can't address that issue unless we all universally agree on how that problem is going to be addressed. That's just one example, I think, of how we are working across the county in a very unique environment, and probably from the relational perspective, different than many other counties are trying to address these issues.
Yeah. So you all police about 800,000+ people of the 3.2 million here in Orange County. You are going to be in this position. You ran and won unopposed. I hope you wouldn't lose unopposed. That would be pretty bad.
My
right?
wife voted for me, so I knew I had it in the bag.
Sheriff Barnes, many people are just afraid. They're afraid of the mass shootings. They're afraid of the division politically, which has caused violence. There's mental illness, the homeless population, and I don't want to demonize the homeless population, but there's a lot of mental illness out there, and people have been just shaken by what we have seen in our world today. For example, according to the Boston Globe, an article just a couple of days ago, in the last 186 days, there's been 314 mass shootings. In 2022, there are more mass shootings than there has been in the previous years. And a mass shooting is defined by a single event where 4 or more people have been shot. And so I can't imagine 314 already. The world seems to be more violent. It seems to be more scary. And not even worship centers are sacred. How do you speak to this fear? And is there any hope?
How much time do we have?
As much as you need.
So, first of all, those concerns are legitimate. And I think if you look at some of the incidents that have happened nationally, just over the last 2 months, starting in Buffalo, and then we had our incident at the Presbyterian Church in our jurisdiction, Laguna Woods, and then Oklahoma right after that. Then we had Chicago, or outside Chicago just this past weekend, and not to mention Uvalde, Texas, at the school shooting.
Yeah.
Each one of those, if you just take the three that were close together, Buffalo, Laguna Woods, and Uvalde, Texas, all three different scenarios, different environments, all three different targets, but all targets of hate, and all three had a same common agenda or platform of the perpetrator, which is a target of their aggression and a hope to take human life. And what's unique about those, we had Buffalo was based on race, a hatred of a race. The issue we dealt with was a hatred of a nationality based on people who are Taiwanese, which is maybe very unique when you look at some of these incidents. And then we had Uvalde, Texas, which of course is just somebody I can't explain, picking out school children for some perceived injustice or target of their hate. And that's one too many. And of course, school children should be able to go anywhere. They should be able to go to the Presbyterian church and practice worship. They should be able to go to school without any of these fears. I can only talk about, when I talk about what I think the solutions are, I'm going to use Orange County as a reference. That's what I have control over.
Right.
And just in comparison between what happened in Uvalde, Texas, which I think some people have seen some of those videos, and it's hard to explain, not being critical of the police department of Uvalde, but that's not what we do here, which I think is very important for people to know. For many years, I'll get to places of worship in just a moment, but for many years, for decades actually, we've been practicing for what happened in Laguna Woods for decades. And at one point many years ago, one of my bosses questioned me, Don, you have all this training, all this money, all this expense, and for what? And we knew why on that day, on May 15th, when that happened in Laguna Woods. And in comparison, by the way, we trained for that, which is models that we are now have been implemented and emulated nationally for what we call immediate action rapid deployment, which is active shooter, how to get into a facility like Columbine or one of these other schools and address the threat. MACTAC, which is an acronym for Multi-Assault Counterterrorism Action Capability. After Mumbai, when you have multiple locations that are being attacked, we develop tactical strategies on how to address those threats, how to get to the threat. So not being critical of Uvalde when our incident happened, and this is, I think, good for our public to know how highly trained we are and how we address the issues. From the time the call was dispatched on the radio to our deputies, in less than 4 minutes, they had responded to the church, formulated into their tactical ear, came up with an assault team or contact team, entered the facility. In less than 4 minutes, they were inside the church.
Oh, wow.
In less than 5 minutes, they had the individual in handcuffs. That's the way we train to do it here. And that doesn't matter if it's at a place of worship or a high school or an elementary school or a business. They do it the same way. When it comes to guns, this is where the balance test comes in. And I had a conversation with some gun groups after Uvalde, Texas, and they were very concerned that they're going to lose their guns. Are they going to take our guns from us? And I started the conversation this way. I said, can we agree that the individual in Uvalde, Texas should have never been in possession of that firearm? If you tell me he had a right, then I'm done talking to you, because that is not the answer, and that's not the protection that the Second Amendment provides. And so if we can agree that never should have happened, now we can have the conversation over the Constitution and the rights provided in it and the balance of the protections of the communities where everybody needs to be safe. And you have to balance those tests. So I'm a believer of mandatory wait periods or grace periods. I'm a believer in red flag laws. I'm a believer that those things have value. I'm also a believer in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, and you have to love them all. You don't get to pick and choose which ones you support. But somewhere in there's got to be some balance to keep these guns from individuals. The individual in our incident in Laguna Woods, he lawfully purchased that firearm decades before he used it that way. I'm not sure what tripwire or what source of information could have brought that to our attention, but there were triggers. There were signs that he was acting erratically that could have been acted upon potentially if it was brought to the attention of a policing agency to intervene that might have prevented that. So the old adage, see something, say something, that's not accurate anymore. What we should be saying is know something, say something. Most every time people know something or have knowledge of something, that goes unreported. And after the fact, when we after action these incidents, it's, yes, Joe was making weird comments, and they didn't know how to bring that to attention if somebody might be able to intervene. The mental health component is a very serious one, and we have challenging issues that we are all facing here in Orange County and abroad. And I mentioned that I'm deep in homelessness issues. For those who are watching, and maybe some are watching abroad, it might surprise you when I tell you that I run the largest mental health hospital in Orange County. It's called the Orange County Jail.
Yeah.
People default to being there, and we have very robust programs to get people into mental health stability and into sobriety. Right now, my population is significantly reduced because of COVID, about 3,400 people entrusted to my care. Notice I didn't say inmates. People entrusted to my care, whom we are caring for. A normal environment would have as many as 6,500 or 7,200. So we have this reduced population, but I have 950 of them are in medication-assisted treatment for opioid addiction, which costs taxpayers about $3 million a year just in the medications to perform that function. And that's not a bad thing, because we're getting people into sobriety while they're entrusted to my care, but we need to transition them out into a public space and keep them into sobriety, and those warm handoffs have to happen. What I love about what we've done just in 3 years, even through COVID, if not for COVID, these things would have been fully implemented. We are building the system backwards, so we have intervention strategies so that people aren't brought to jail for some of these challenging issues they face, mental illness or opioid addiction or substance use. And post-release, we're tying them to post-release sustained success programs if they're willing to stay into sobriety, into mental health stability, into housing, into employment. I have this desire to bring back vocational training within our correctional facilities, automotive maintenance and electrical or whatever it might be, and get people trained into prevailing wage jobs and tie them to employment. And the population that cycles through my jail all year long, that are mentally ill and low-level offenders, if we could solve the problem of diverting them into programs that keep them into a good place, I would venture that I could reduce my jail population by 25%, minimally, just from keeping these people cycling through our jails. So it's a large, complex issue, but on the active shooter issue specifically, and I know you know this, but your congregation may not know this, or those watching, I'm a little unique. I have my own fusion center, which is started as a counterterrorism fusion center post 9/11. It's all crimes, all hazards. They do a training course specific to places of worship for how to keep places of worship safe. We have a faith liaison program that we started that's been nationally recognized, how to work with faith leaders and members of the staff on how to intervene and interact appropriately. All these things are very key in helping us keep our places of worship safe. And what I love most is I have numerous councils, one of which you chair for me, my Black Community Council, that is an inclusion council with the community. But we also have an Interfaith Council that I run, and it's every faith tradition in Orange County, whether you're Jewish or Muslim or Christian or whatever it might be. We have representatives from all these different groups, and we all come together and collaborate. What's very, I think, unique for us, and what I hope to be emulated as I brag about this program to my peers, is that when something happens like Poway a few years ago, where the synagogue was attacked, it isn't just the Jewish community speaking up. It's all of us standing up, united, shoulder to shoulder, lifting each other up and saying that is not okay. There is no place for any form of hate within our community, and we stand as brothers and sisters and say that is intolerable, and we're not going to tolerate that behavior.
So that's good to know. We have had our church assessed by various organizations, and we are aligning ourselves with safe practices so that this place is a place of safety for our worship experience. But I want to get into something that's a little bit more touchy. I'm getting messages from the congregation and from online. Historically, there has been mistrust between the community of color and policing. One, could you acknowledge that there has been that mistrust? And then two, what has been put in place to bridge the gap, to bring about trust on both sides. And I don't mind talking about what we can do as well to help build trust. But there has historically, legitimately, not from a place of paranoia, not from a place of criminology, but just from a place of race and fear and stereotypes, there has been this mistrust.
Absolutely. I don't think that you can discount that. And what I can't do is I can't tell somebody how they can feel. If they have that feeling, I have to address how they interpret that fear, and hopefully have a dialogue or reestablish that trust through communication and a relationship that would help dispel that distrust and rebuild it in a way. And I know you've heard me say this before, but we can stand in different corners of the room and yell back and forth at each other how right we all are, or we can bury that and walk to the middle of the room and have a conversation and a dialogue. And I think that, especially with Second Baptist and other churches in Orange County that have predominantly black congregations, I think we've come a long way towards that. But there's a manifestation that got us here, not just a historical component that goes back hundreds of years, but just even more recently in the way policing is performed within this country that has added to that disconnect that doesn't lead to a trusting relationship, that actually has created the divide between it. And this is only probably maybe 50 years old that's really manifested into this. And if you go back to how policing works and has changed from the 1960s, 90s, 1970s to today, and about the late 60s, early 70s, we transitioned as a profession to what's considered the professional policing model. That's the you call, we come, right? And so we didn't really see police officers or deputy sheriffs assigned to communities anymore. The foot patrols that always existed back in those days and knowing everybody in the neighborhood. Now, after 911 was created in the late 60s, it was we get dispatched and you kind of drive through communities to a location. And that didn't help us. It didn't help us connect with the communities we were there to serve. You didn't get to know people like you should. I was talking to, I don't know if you know who Simon Sinek is. Simon Sinek is a very popular author, and he had come to our organization, and we had 700 of our 4,000 employees attend this kind of dialogue. And he had referenced that in his conversation about the riots in '92 and how that was, this pivotal moment. And I agree with him, but '92 was a manifestation of decades that got to that point that resulted in the riots. It wasn't spontaneous just because of what happened at that incident. That was decades of an erosion of trust within policing that needed to be restored. I think the hard part about that, and not that I'll make this, we are limited on resources. I would love to have a deputy sheriff in every community that's assigned there. There's a cost burden that comes with that. I can tell you what my expectations are of my staff, which hasn't changed over the years, which is I would expect them during a shift assignment, which is usually about 4 months, to get to know every place of worship within their patrol area, to visit every school within their patrol area, whenever possible, get out of their car and walk businesses and make contact with employees and managers and restore that kind of hybrid version of what that professional policing model is, and also with the connectivity part of it. All that said, it doesn't change anything unless we become more human in the way we do our job. And by that, I have to strive to my people. It's okay to smile. It's okay to see you emote. If you hear me speaking, you notice I don't say law enforcement, I say policing. Law enforcement, the enforcement of the law, is a very, very small percentage of what we do in a day. Most of the time, we have relations with the community, we're having dialogue with people, we're dealing with witnesses or victims of crime. That's not law enforcement, that's policing. And the three tenets of policing are very simple, and we have to get back to what we have been charged with as our profession. Prevention of violations of law, apprehending those who break the law, and order maintenance within our community. That's really the three tenets of policing. We do a lot more that's fallen on our shoulders because of some of the failures of other parts of government, like mental illness. That's never been the design for law enforcement or policing to take that on. It's been a manifestation of other failures that we have adopted that as one of the issues, and all the reasons why people come to our attention.
Yeah, I agree. Mental illness and policing, that's just not your area of specialty, but yet you're confronted with it when you're dealing with policing and enforcing in the laws. But I want to go back to, this history of distrust and mistrust, which is legitimate, but it also begins to shape our attitudes and our responses. You and I had a conversation, weeks ago, and also we commented today. We teach our children when they are pulled over by the police or being pulled over by the police in the evening, and I can see you all shaking your head. We tell our children, don't pull over if it's dark. Pull over in a place that's well lit and other people, and because we want our children to be safe. And black men, to be quite honest, have that same attitude. We don't want to be pulled over in a dark space when no one can see. We would drive an extra mile, an extra 2 or 3 minutes to get to a place that is well lit so that if something happens, there may be someone who can see. And when I shared that story with you and you had your own story similar to that, your response from a policing side was what?
Why are they running from me?
Why are they running from us?
Why aren't they doing what I expect them to do, which is merge to the right and stop? What are they hiding from me? Why am I pursuing this vehicle? It's a different mindset. And I think when you look at it from the different perspective, it's the risk factor goes up. It elevates to this is not normal behavior. And I can't discount the belief that you have, but I think when you look at it from the response, it's not what you'd expect. So, and I can't say that I would say that's not the appropriate. I can't tell people how to feel. I would say if somebody is going to do that, my recommendation would be, first of all, I don't recommend doing that, but if you are going to, say, drive to a well-lit spot, call 911 and tell the dispatcher what you're doing so they can relay that to the deputy or officer that the person's going to go to the 7-Eleven, pull in the parking lot and stop, or something like that. Not encouraging that behavior, but I'd much rather have that process in place to have some interim dialogue so that somebody knows what they're hoping to accomplish by getting to a well-lit location.
Yeah. But you can understand, based on the history, why someone would do that. And your recommendation is, if you're going to do that, first of all, your recommendation is not to do it. Just pull over right away. But that brings about fear and trepidation for those who have a history, a real history, not just a history that they see on television, not just a history that they've read in the history books, but a personal history that have not been very friendly with law enforcement agencies. And so now they have an elevated heart rate. At the same time, the officer has an elevated heart rate because this person is not obeying. And it's kind of this, and how do you begin to de-escalate something that has escalated?
Yeah,
when everybody is trying to be safe.
Yeah, and I think the hard part, and this came up in a dialogue I had with a pastor of a different church, another black church, and he had shared with me, and this is going back years, even before George Floyd, and he said, Don, you have to realize that black men are tired and they're standing up against the police. And I said, well, you have to understand that's not de-escalation, that's escalation. It's opposite of what we would expect them to do. And if they're going here, we go here, and that's not a good desired outcome, because my rule number one is everyone goes home. Yeah. That's not everyone in uniform, that's everybody goes home. And so it's not an easy solution to problem to solve. And we haven't done ourselves any favors either in the way we encounter the public. I would hope that we can emote, we can be human, we can dialogue. When I was trained in patrol decades ago, it was walk up, license, registration, proof of insurance, please. Why'd you stop me? License, registration, proof of insurance. And I was trained that because you don't want to start debating with somebody about the violation or before you have the information necessary to write the citation. If I were doing that job today, I would not do the job that way. And my hope would be our staff has changed. I think they have. Ivan, I pulled you over because you rolled through that stop sign. And start there. Now you know why you were stopped. I may see your license, registration, and proof of insurance, please. Now you may want to debate that, and that might become more difficult, but at least you know why you were stopped. And that's, I think, a better communicative way to restore trust, okay? Now, you may argue whether you did or didn't roll through the stop sign, who knows? But at least you know why you got pulled over, and it's a good starting place rather than the ambiguity of not knowing that encounter.
So, again, I don't want to belabor the whole race piece, but my question is, Orange County is very diverse. Santa Ana, certain parts of Santa Ana look very different than certain parts of Huntington Beach. As a matter of fact, Huntington Beach has one of the highest active white supremacist groups in this area, right? And what are you doing as the sheriff of Orange County to begin to bring about a sense of trust and community? And I can even talk about what we're doing to try to bring about that as well. We don't put the onus on you only, but what are you doing to help bring about really a community within all this division in the world?
Well, first, you're absolutely right. When you look at Orange County, we have a very diverse community. When you look at religious diversity, when you look at some of the populations who are here that have a large population, the Vietnamese population, the Chinese population, the Middle Eastern populations that represent Orange County, it is very, very diverse. It's probably maybe one of the last real melting pots that exist within a very urban area. I mentioned the Interfaith Council. I think that's very key in solving that problem. I mentioned relationships with the chiefs of police. The city of Huntington Beach has its own police department. I can tell you when you get to these very high-risk populations, like the very extreme groups, like white supremacist groups and others like it, we have a very robust investigative pool. Many of them work specifically on these targeted groups, white supremacist groups, prison gangs, and we have, my department is fortunately large enough that I can have subject matter experts that can address those groups. When you deal with these issues, and I think what's most important, and hopefully what your congregation will get out of this, I'm about as middle-of-the-road agnostic as you can get. It doesn't matter what you represent. If you break the law, and especially significant laws, you're going to be held accountable. We had over 80 protests that my department responded to after George Floyd. And I want you to think about this when you look at the protection of rights. My staff is protecting the First Amendment rights of individuals who are yelling at them about how much they hate them. That's really what they encountered over and over again. Mm-hmm. And I had to have conversations with them about, it's not the message, it's the right to be able to protest and to demonstrate. And you are providing that to them. Your inside voice should be saying, you're welcome. And that's, what they have done that. In that, though, we made numerous arrests throughout these protests, and we were an equal enforcer. I arrested right-wing pro-Trump protesters for breaking the law. I arrested the other side, BLM, Antifa, other groups that were breaking the law. I didn't have a side. We had one instance where we had a protest that was more BLM focused, and we had made 4 arrests within about probably 40 minutes. The same group said they got booked in jail. They got released. They had another protest. They said, we have a protest tonight, and we don't want to have any problems. That's no problem. We'll be there to support your First Amendment right. Just don't break the law. And it was great. It went over without a problem. They came back out, and they got to get their voices heard, which is the desire. And we didn't impede that in any way. We were there to support their protest. But that doesn't mean you get to tag cars and break windows and do other things along the way. That's not a protest. Yeah. That's a riot. Yeah. And there's a big difference between the two.
I was very proud of you and your response to George Floyd. Many people don't know, when we had the conversation and you met with a group of black leaders in Orange County, you said that's not policing and that's not what we were trained to do. You did not stand on the fence. You did not protect the blue wall of silence. You were very open and honest about how that was a horrific event, and you thought justice was served. That was pretty awesome. I really appreciate that. I want to say thank you again for that. With that being said, you have given me access to recruits. You all train here in Orange County hundreds of recruits that go and serve multiple places, not just Orange County Sheriff's Department, but many other cities and other counties throughout Southern California. You're like a hub of training, and you have given me an access to have conversations with small groups, and we have what I call open and honest conversations. One of the things that concerns me is that every single recruit to a man and woman, they talk about they get into policing because they want to make a difference. They don't want to continue the bad practices of the old blue wall, if you will. Mr. Mitchell and I have had many opportunities to share with them. And one of the things that concerns me is oftentimes their first assignment is in the jails, the worst of the worst, if you will. And they'll spend sometimes a couple years in their first assignment after coming out of this utopian kind of, experience in their training into prison. How does that impact them from being biased? Because in the prisons, in the jails, it's higher minority population. It is a lot of bad actors, and it's hard to go from this training camp into the jail systems and not maybe
Get hardened.
Yeah, and be influenced by the old heads, right? That kind of say, hey, that's that stuff you learned there. Here's the real world. And how do they balance the tension between what they just learned and what they hope and aspire for and what real life slaps in the face? Mike Tyson said, everybody has a plan until you get punched in the face, right? So they get punched in the face. What kind of protections or what kind of support systems are in place to keep them pure, if you will?
Sure. So first, I mentioned how many years I've been in the department. I just started my 34th year, and I can tell you there's this adage of that's the way we've always done it. And I hate that line. If somebody uses that to me and they're within arm's reach, I might smack them upside the head. We have to be innovative, and we have to be, this is not an oligopoly where we have this government-sanctioned control over policing. It's a relationship with the community. It's a partnership with the community. And that includes the community that's represented within our correctional facilities, a microcosm of society. I can tell you through my experiences, and I encourage our staff to dialogue with those who are entrusted to our care, to get to know them and talk about who they are, and they'll openly talk to you. I had a call many years ago where an individual asked me, when I was talking to him as a domestic violence call, if you remember how that works, you have a cover officer and a contact officer, and I was the cover. I'm going back and forth. And after about 10 minutes, this gentleman says, can I ask you a question? Why can't your partner be more like you? Why does he have to be such an expletive? And I remember telling him, I said, sir, I apologize for my partner's behavior. Keep in mind, at that point, we're both the same rank. I apologize for my partner's behavior. Some of the nicest people I've ever met were people within the Orange County Jail. And some of the biggest jerks I've ever met were my coworkers. We hire from the human race. I'm in a different position now, so I can influence differently what my expectations are of my staff. And I think we're doing a really good job in there to show the empathy for people, to show grace upon people. Not all of them are nice, but that doesn't represent the entire population who are within our correctional facilities. So this may shock you. Of all the assignments we have, when I started in this profession, gangs and narcotics and all these tactical teams, that was the fun jobs. You know what the most desired job that I have within the Sheriff's Department is today?
No.
Working in the Behavioral Health Bureau, the mental health and the outreach to the community. There's a waiting list of deputies who want to work in that assignment. It goes to show, first of all, the millennials, I love them if you can figure them out. If you can figure them out. And how you figure them out is you have to give them purpose and value and input and contributions and recognize it. A little bit of nurturing. If you don't provide that to them, they will up and leave. They'll go find it somewhere else. They're not tied to organizations and commitment like some people we were 30 years ago. So with that, we have phenomenal people that are just doing tremendous outreach efforts. And that happens within our jails and happens within the community as well. I have had that whole national narrative that policing is broken. I can tell you that I don't think that's completely true. I think we can do better. We should always strive to do better. But I probably get 100 compliments or commendations for every one complaint that I get from the public. And it's just overwhelmingly positive. And to have that, this is not a zero-sum game where somebody has to lose for us to win. This is an equal-sum game where we can all win if we just treat people decently. Sometimes the right thing to do is not to take somebody to jail. Sometimes the right thing to do is to do some other action or whatever that might be, and I think that's very, very important. And most importantly, how you started this conversation is the inclusion of other people who can contribute from a community stakeholder perspective, like you have been doing in your efforts, and I applaud you for that, because I offered the invitation for Ivan to get engaged and involved, and he came in all in. And what he does is we have every recruit class that comes through my academy, and by the way, we train for about 60 policing agencies in the greater Southern California area, many of them from Los Angeles County. Many of them drive by 3 or 4 different training academies to come to our academy to be trained. And it's not just Ivan, we have individuals from the Jewish community, the rabbis, and we have an imam from a mosque. We'll talk about the diversity in which they may encounter within the community and kind of break down those walls and build bridges so that we have an understanding. And the recruits come back and they report out to each other what they learned about the black community through Ivan, or the Muslim community through the imam, or the Jewish community through a rabbi. And what I have learned, and I know what they're learning through this, is when you take away the identifiers or how we might perceive somebody from a physical appearance, and I just get to know Ivan, we're 99.8% alike. We want the same things within the community. We want a community built on respect and trust and an opportunity. We want our kids to be able to go to school and be safe, and we want the same things. And that doesn't matter what religion you are, what faith you are, what race you are. And I think if we can build towards a community like that, that would be the greatest contributor to the environment that will turn this corner we've all been striving to turn. I don't know if I'm going to brag on you one more time, because I love you. Ivan was invited to be the keynote speaker at one of our graduations. And by the way, that invitation is almost always exclusively for somebody from a police chief or somebody like that. In fact, in recent history, you may be the only one I remember from somebody who's not within this profession to come and speak. That is on our channel on YouTube. I highly encourage you to find that and view it. It was so inspirational for me that we isolated just his speech, and we put it up on our department channel to be shared. I shared it through social media as well, because I thought it was not only inspirational, but I think it was also exactly the message that young recruits need to hear about their interaction and what we should expect with them as members of our community. It was very, very well done.
I appreciate that. That was one of the highlights of my 24-year years in pastoring and community work. One of the things that I think is important that I share with the recruits, and Mr. Ernest Mitchell, who's here with us today, we talk about the importance of rejecting any language that dehumanizes another human being. And so not just ignore it, but to reject it and to refute anything that dehumanizes anyone, regardless of their race, regardless of the religion, regardless of the crime they're being investigated for. I think that's one. The second thing I talk about, it's important not to just engage, and you mentioned that, in the community when you're policing or investigating a crime, but building relationships, spending time with people. Proximity brings about empathy, right? And then the last thing is to take care of yourself. Mm-hmm. Like when we're out of balance, when we don't get the proper rest and we're not exercising and we don't have a hobby and a way to express ourselves outside of work, we bring in garbage to our work environment. That's not just true in policing, that's true in any environment. And so those are the specific things that I really challenge recruits. Make sure you care for yourself, right? Make sure you feel good about yourself. Make sure you're around people who esteem you and love you. Make sure that when someone says something about a particular group that is dehumanizing, don't just ignore it, speak against it. And then when you don't understand a group of people, when you don't know a community, spend time in that community, not as a police officer, but as one who is seeking to understand. So those are the things that I think are important. The question I have for you is, you mentioned that as a leader, you're the top man, right? What specifically are things that you are addressing or have addressed in the past and are addressing in the future to bring about unity in our community? That's a rhyme, boom. And then how can we help you? So I'll give you a moment to think about that, and I'll give an example here. For me, coming to this historic church, great history, has been through ups and downs, and is a pillar. There were still some things in our church that I just didn't like. I didn't think the way we treated women was appropriate as it relates to access to do ministry full and free. And that was something that, as the top guy, as long as I'm here, I'm going to try to make sure that every person is treated equally as it relates to ministry gifts. That's my responsibility. I think another responsibility that kind of concerned me, something that kept me up at night, was hearing the voice of children and people who are outside of our own culture. I refused to pastor a church that was for black folks only. I wanted to pastor a church that was going to demonstrate the love of God to every nation, every generation, and for every situation. And that's what I am going to do as the leader of this organization. And so the same question to you, what are some of the things that you are specifically working on to make the Orange County Sheriff's Department better? And the second part is team, family, church. How can we partner with you? Because we are better together to help you reach your goals.
That was a great introduction, by the way, and I think you're the ambassador of love, quite honestly, because you have this ability just to connect with people. That's worth a round of applause. We have numerous programs. I don't want to get programmatically into it. I want to talk about the people whom I get to work with every day. Okay. And what I encourage in our daily work is to take advantage of opportunities. The greatest travesty that we can have, when I talk to recruits, just like Ivan does, I talk to every one of them that graduates in a green uniform from our academy before they even start their first day. The greatest travesty for any one of us is to get to the end of a career looking back at opportunities missed. And there are plenty of them. If I ask every recruit that becomes a deputy sheriff why you wanted to enter this profession, everyone will say something along the line of, I wanted to serve, I want to give back to my community.
That's correct.
And many of them, I think, live up to that standard. Some of them get changed. And those that become disenfranchised, they can go try to find their happiness somewhere else. I don't want them as part of the organization. I want them to go either to get on the team and understand what we're hoping to accomplish here as an organization, or get out of the way, because it's very dysfunctional. I don't know if they're as predominant as it used to be decades ago. I think we have a really good team of people that are encouraging. I talk about the Sheriff's Department as a family. Families lift each other up, their resources, they lean on each other, and we have to have that as a component. I have a phenomenal peer support team that has been in place for about 10 years. These are my employees that look out for the mental health and well-being of their peers. We have tremendous hiring efforts that are underway. Young ladies are what we're trying to attract into this profession. And in that effort, we're raising our numbers over a very concerted effort. And one of my staff said, what's the target? How many women will be enough? I said, well, if we're representative of the community, 51%. There's no right number. It's getting the right people who want to be part of this. So all of that is great, but the ladies may appreciate this more than the fellas in the room, but I want to be known as the Nordstroms of policing. I want that high level of reputation when people think of our organization. They know it's highly reputable, has a high degree of service, and it's very important. The one thing that I did do that was very intentional, if you looked after George Floyd, and I mentioned Ivan as part of our Black Community Council, I have a Latino Community Council, the LGBTQ Policing Partnership, and it's all these community engagements that we have. I asked the question, how are we doing in our house? And I created internally a diversion council, having every one of these demographics represented, and come to me. And it's about 40 employees who had the courage to get engaged. And what I learned through them was we're doing pretty good as far as equality and opportunity and how we treat each other. And it just was a pivotal moment. Now I have this great resource of people that I get to use as a sounding board for things that we do programmatically. What I hope to do over time is change some of the cultural issues that exist, that kind of rite of passage for new employees. You got to earn it when you come in. I think that might be a little bit about what you spoke to about that environment. And by the way, that environment happens in every policing organization. I think we're actually much better than most because I'm intolerant of any type of hazing or you got to earn it. And that is just not what we do to each other. If you are part of this family, I asked a question one time, I said, who has kids? And hands went up. And I said, who has more than one kid? And the hand stayed up. And I said, when you were having your second, third, or fourth child, did you tell your existing family when this child gets here in 3 years, they'll become one of us? Or do you nurture it and develop it and correct it and make it part of the family on day one? When you put on this uniform and walk across this stage that you were privileged to be part of, that's when you become a part. You're a deputy sheriff. Even though you're deputy sheriff one day, it doesn't matter if it's 1 day or 30 years in 1 day, you're part of this family, and we should embrace us as a family and support each other. And I think what's key about your question is when you create an environment like that that's nurturing and inspiring and supportive, it softens people. It softens people and lets them know that this is a safe work environment. And hopefully you can emulate that within the community and with your conversations and dialogue and actually demonstration of our actions to them. I think we have come a long way. I think there is still some space to grow, but I believe we're making some strides in accomplishing that. Sir Peel, Robert Peel, who's really the father of modern policing from hundreds of years ago, summarized it best. The police are the community and the community are the police. It is a partnership. It isn't us versus them. And I think that we need to get rid of that. You know, we're on one side, you're on the other. The public is so overwhelmingly larger than any police organization. If you lose trust, if you don't have the support, if you don't have the relationship and the collaboration with the community, we could very easily be overtaken in any given moment. There's not enough of us to be able to defend us. That's why you have to seek out and solicit that partnership. And it happens with dialogue that we have had. I think, and I mentioned how many years I've been here, I challenge my staff, and I wish I could demonstrate this, but I actually gave out my last couple stickers earlier today. I've given out more of the little Sheriff Star stickers than probably everybody in this department combined over my career. And it's an icebreaker. It's a walking up, always asking the parent, do you mind if I give your child a sticker? This may shock you. I've never been told no. Even with a hardcore gang member who probably needs that sticker more than anybody, that child, to say, may I give your child a sticker? Yes, you can give my child a sticker. And it creates this opportunity to have a dialogue. I like to talk, if you haven't noticed. When I go to lunch, I start dialogue with people in line ahead of me or a line behind me or whatever it may be. They're never going to come up to me and say, may I have a conversation with you? But if you prime that conversation with it, how are you doing today? Do you work in the area? You know, what do you do? It's just the uniform is taken away, and now it's just a person who's having a conversation. And I think we are responsible for our own reputation that we earn. And that's not always positive, and it hasn't historically been positive. But we also have an opportunity to restore that reputation, that integrity, that trust through just being connected with the people we are privileged to serve. And that should be the focus that we have within our communities. I think that we're trying to drive that message. I think it's being well received.
Yeah, I want to say, being a guy who's born and raised in South Central LA, where we had zero trust for law enforcement, who has had experiences that were horrific, dealing with law enforcement agencies and all that kind of stuff. I have been impressed with the Orange County Sheriff's Department, my interaction with them. Everywhere I go, whether they know who I am or not, it has been really wonderful. And so I want to thank you for your leadership in that area. And it's just really exciting to see what we can be. even with that being said, I still want to push us. I want to push us to have every officer, like you said, smile more, right? And talk with a little bit more respect and courtesy from the very beginning. I know it's difficult. You have to control the situation, especially out in the street. But a smile and a legitimate ma'am or sir goes a long, long way. With that being said, if I could share one thing with my community that you would want me to share, and then I want to give you all just a few minutes to ask questions from the congregation. What message would you want for me to share with my congregation as it relates to the relationship between police officers and the community?
That is a great question. And I think when you look at, first, there's a lot of different policing agencies in Orange County, but I think we philosophically have the same belief system in the way we interact with our communities. Very diverse communities. Some are socioeconomically challenged. Some are very affluent. We talked about race dispersion throughout the county, and especially for the black community, it's only 2% of Orange County, and not really, congregated in any one particular area.
Right.
So we don't have those kind of environments in LA. We just have people who are part of the fabric of the Orange County community, which is great. I think from the congregation perspective, I loved, before we started filming, I loved the dialogue that I had with the congregation before we started filming and just talking to people. And my hope is in that dialogue that you can carry that same dialogue onto others who might be in this uniform, to just talk to them. Because I know there is an apprehension within the community at large, and specifically within the black community, to have that very uncomfortable initial conversation to say, how are you today, or whatever it might be. Sometimes we have to get comfortably uncomfortable in that environment to go and just have this conversation. So my hope is that our staff will do that towards you, but just to have that, may I just have a brief conversation with them. May thank you for your service. That goes a long way. It happens to me routinely, where people will thank me for my service, sometimes specifically as being the sheriff. My response is always the same: thank you very much. I'm blessed. I've got a great team of people I get to work with every day. But some way that you can have a dialogue with them, wherever it might be, and kind of draw the humanity out of them, not behind the uniform, but just as a person. We have a lot of very varied backgrounds within those who get to serve in the Sheriff's Department, and I love the stories behind them. And if I could I almost kind of wish we didn't have to wear a uniform when we were within the community. Because if we just were dressed like you, or like we would dress within a community, that wall is already taken down because of the stigma associated with the uniform, which I think is unfortunate. We have to have it because we have to be identifiable, but it also creates this somewhat social barrier or psychological barrier with the public that we serve. So I would say as much as you can, just like you would expect me to look deeper than the color of the skin of Ivan and identify him as my brother and find these commonalities, to look behind the uniform and the badge and realize there's a person wearing that. And they have the same emotions, they have the same concerns, they have the same likes, they have the same wants, we want the same outcomes. I think all those are very important to see those who are charged with the protection of our community as people and not as just somebody wearing a uniform. To summarize that a different way, I'll tell you the story like this. And I don't intend to offend anybody by discrediting the history of our community or past hurts or harms that were created, but I was talking to a pastor of a different church. I was dressed in a suit like Ivan, not as good looking as Ivan, obviously, in a suit.
Of course.
I was not in my uniform. And he was telling me, you have to understand what it's like to be stereotyped and profiled. You'll never understand that experience. And I looked at him and I said, you have to understand, every day I put my uniform on, I'm stereotyped and I'm profiled by people who do not know me. They just see the badge and the uniform. And to his credit, he acknowledged, he said, yes, I never thought about that. You are right. So sometimes we need to look well beyond what we think of somebody by an appearance. And we have biases, and those biases go both ways. There are people who are biased by the uniform because of past experience, maybe having never interacted with anybody from my organization, or maybe never having interacted with somebody like me. I'm a big believer. I'm an avid reader. I know Pastor Pitts is why I saw his library when I was in office. But simple things like mirroring, smiling at somebody makes them smile back. There's these things you can do to show mutual respect and connectivity with people that I'm an avid believer in when you're talking or communicating with somebody. The body language says a lot to somebody about the way you stand, and that classic, Joe Friday stance is not necessary 98% of the time when you're dealing with just the general public. Just be a person. Just be a person.
Yeah. It's interesting because when I think about, I agree that the uniform brings about a stereotype. It brings about anxiety for some who've had experiences versus others. But I also think that that uniform has power. And it has a power that, when coupled with a stereotype or a bias, leads to things that are unfortunate. And my bias of you with no weapon doesn't have that same amount of power. But you and I had a conversation earlier today about a power greater than any weapon. I always talk about there's a power greater than the weapon of the taser or the baton or even the gun, and that's the power of love. And you and I talked earlier today about the power of our faith. And several questions that I received from the audience was about the bleakness of elevating of crime and is the world safe? And you had a pretty good answer about why you think there's so much violence and why there's so much discord amongst our community today. You want to share that?
Sure. It was a brief conversation we had, and Ivan and I were just kind of talking back and forth, and I have this firm belief that a lot of the manifestations of some of the issues we're facing in our communities today is the disconnect with our faith, the disconnect with our places of worship. And I think we need to, and I think if there is a positive outcome of COVID, was that desire to be connected to other people. When we had forced people out of social settings, or you couldn't go to church or whatever it might be, there was this need to connect. And many people probably met their neighbors for the first time during that period because they may have never known them, but they went to check on neighbors who were elderly or walked across the street and had conversations and probably met a lot of people they never had met before. But I do believe when you look at technology, if you want to, these devices are antisocial. They're not social. It doesn't create that environment of intimacy by being physically close or face-to-face and looking somebody in the eye and having a conversation, emoting with them and having that connectivity. And I think when you look at some of the challenges we're facing and some of the failures that we're facing and some of the causal factors beyond that, like the platform social media create for cyberbullying and all these other things that harm people, it is a manifestation from getting away with what we as humans need, which is connectivity, and what the places of worship provide for that, which is community, to get together and be supportive of one another. And I'm an avid believer of what you said, by the way, when you started with this is not a black church, it's a church for everybody. One lesson I learned many years ago, decades ago, is several times a year go to a church that's not your own and not like your own. Yeah. Go somewhere else and worship with people who are maybe not exactly like you, and that is something that I have a tendency to do because I don't want to be myopic. My church is very diverse, but I don't want to be myopic and thinking that that's the only representation of the community is it can only be found in my place of worship. It has to be something that you can go and experience and worship and break bread and all the other things that happen that are part of the larger community, which I think is very important for people to focus on.
Yeah, I think I want to clear up some, because I did say that I didn't want to pastor a black church, meaning for me, a black church is not skin color. A black church is our soul. There's a soul that we have. There's a mission that we have. There's a swag that goes with our rags. And so,
well, I have to just tell you, I know what you're talking about because the church that I go to has a service that has that. I'm in uniform, so I'm very cautious about talking about a specific religion because I can't do that. But in a general context, my wife and I would go to that service, and there's a different energy that happens in that service, and there's different songs that happen in that service, and you come out a little. It's like going to aerobics. It's like a workout when you go to church, and we've always enjoyed that.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm excited about it. So I have an invitation, and I'll invite you all, if you have a question or two, come to the mic. We'll take those. But I want to invite you all. You have an invitation to our church picnic, which is September the 17th, and it's in Irvine at Mason Park. And so we would love for you all to come, in uniform or not in uniform. And if you come, get a chance to play dominoes and bid whiz and spades and some other things, and we'll do some cha-cha and then some line dancing and all that other kind of stuff. We'll give y'all a little soul for a day.
Can I tell you something about? So I wanted to talk about the psychology of perception.
Yeah.
And so we had an event like that with a different church, softball game. We showed up, proper attire, and had a kick. And it was a fun day, and we didn't have, it wasn't us versus them. We had teams where we dispersed everybody in. And here's the irony about the perception I talked about 3 weeks after that, one of my staff that was there playing softball, now in uniform, walked up to the guys he was playing softball with, and they looked at him like they didn't recognize him because of the uniform. They couldn't look beyond it. That's where we really need to get beyond. And he said, he was talking to him and joking. He goes, "Hey, it's me. Do you remember me from softball?" And they go, "Oh yeah, now we know who you are." Yeah. How do we break that wall down? How do we get beyond the perception that just is present in the uniform, and then get back to lifting each other up, making each other whole, complete, making each other feel safe? Yeah. And I can't make you feel safe. I can only create an environment in which you feel respected, valued, and that environment of safety by very concerted and intentional efforts through dialogue, discussion, and fellowship that gives us the opportunity to build that bridge of trust.
So just my quick cursory answer to how do we do that, one is we continue to have experiences with each other and not have one-offs. Oftentimes, someone like a George Floyd is killed, and then we do stuff for about a week, and then we go our separate ways. I think we need to continue to do things together. I think, two, we must eradicate the idea of scarcity. I think that when we think that we live in a limited world of resources, we begin to grab what's ours. And the God that I serve and the God that I read about, the God that I understand, there is no limits. The God is God of abundance, and you can be extremely blessed, and I can be extremely blessed. God is so good that his blessings on you can splash on me, and we both can be wet with God's blessings together. So there is no scarcity, right? I'm not going to lose anything if you gain. And then I think the third thing you can do, and this is just off the top of my head, I got to think more about it, we got to be more like children. Children, little kids, don't stress over the stuff we stress about. They play with who they want to play with. They don't look at color. They don't look at religion. They don't look at culture. They just see someone who smiles at them and they engage. And I think that that's where we have to get. We have to be more like children, understand that there is no limits, that God will provide for us all, and we can't just respond to tragedies. We have to begin to make bonds when there is no tragedy.
Yeah, and I think, especially when you talked about children, and this, I think we can all agree that the heart of a child, there's nothing like it, not the heart of a child. But biases and hate is learned.
It's learned.
It's learned. It's learned and demonstrated by adults through their actions that get picked up and emulated by children. And so, if we really want to break this cycle, and you want to prepare ourselves and hopefully turn a quarter. Every generation is about 20 years. And if we could get into the hearts of our children I think they are probably more inclusive maybe today than they had been in decades past. But we're really just one generation by breaking the cycle of hate and bias within the communities in which we get to serve, which is what we would all hope to do, I think, over time.
Yeah, I agree. Frank.
I know I'm short, but hey, good evening. I have a question for you, Sheriff Barnes, and this might be harder for you to perform than fighting crime out here in Orange County and protecting all of us. It's meeting with, I'll be real polite on this, political hacks that sometimes we, the population, are end up voting for in office. We've had 4 governors this century, and again, I'll be very polite. If I were to grade them, it goes from F-, awful, up to C+, and I won't name who's who. Can you please meet with Governor Newsom and ask him, hey, come and meet with the people on justice and crime issues? Because he is very hard to meet with the public. And give you 2 major reasons, Part A and Part B, why that's true. In Orange County, we've had a number of people who were convicted, sent to prison for decades, only to be found completely innocent. Dwayne McKinney, a black man, 19 years in prison before being found completely innocent. Kevin Green, 16 years in prison right here in Orange County. He lived in Orange County. Found completely innocent, exonerated by the state of California. His former dishonorable discharge in the Marine Corps reversed to honorable discharge. Arthur Carmona, ethnic Mexican, young man, 3 years in prison, found completely innocent. And on and on and on and on. And of course in LA County it's far worse and more numerous. And the worst, most vile, hated, disrespected group of people in prison, even though a lot of them are innocent, are black women. And it's been that way throughout the history of the state, right up to this moment. It's important to try to use your power to get the governor to meet with us so we can talk to him about these issues and help us get these people out of prison, and also some really good justice reform, because if not, then we tend to try to do it ourselves and the results aren't always good. I was a strong, I'll wind this real quick because people, they know me, I talk way too much, so I want to hurry up. Propositions 47 and Proposition 57 I strongly supported. And it did get people out of prison who should not be there, but at one horrific cost. We just lost 2 American heroes, El Monte police officers, and it's important for me to read their names so you know, basically.
So Frank, is your question, what role does the sheriff play in influencing the California legislator with freeing people who are in prison, wrongfully in prison?
Well, more to the point, can you use your influence in order to meet the governor of California and to convince him, hey, you know what, do what I do. Come and talk to some of the people you've been avoiding. Or else, we tend to do things that end up to be destructive to everybody.
Sure. I heard you had 3 questions in there, Frank, and I'll try to address each of them. First of all, anybody that goes to prison that is wrongfully convicted is a travesty. And so we have to make sure that the integrity of our criminal justice system is not, I use the term, zero-sum game. Sending someone to prison at all costs is not an end state that you hope to accomplish for. Our criminal justice, by the way, I have great relationships with the Public Defender's Office. I have great relationships with the Defense Bar. I actually meet with members of the Defense Bar on issues, just like we're meeting here, on issues that affect them, their clients, and while they are entrusted to our care within the jail, because I want to make sure that we should be neutral and impartial. And part of that is, this is the greatest criminal justice system on the planet. It still is. The public defender, the defense, has a very clear role, and you have to embrace the roles that they serve to ensure justice. And so if there is some issue that is either unfair or not impartial, that needs to be corrected through that. Your question about the governor, I serve on numerous committees, and one of those is California State Sheriff's Association, the 58 sheriffs in the state. And I'm not saying this to be critical of Governor Newsom. He is just not open to entertaining conversation with us. And I think that's for a political reason. There's a supermajority in the state of California where the Democratic Party can do whatever they want without a need for the Republican Party. And it's not a party issue. But when you have that type of control, you can do whatever you want without input from other stakeholder groups like law enforcement. And I'll tell you where that's important before I mention your Prop 47 and Prop 57 question. When you have social justice reform, when that came up, and if you remember back a few years ago, here's an example. There was a campaign called 8 Can't Wait. Do you remember what that was? The 8 things that we need to do in policing before to implement change. And that was brought to me and said, Sheriff, you need to do these things, these 8 things, and they need to be done right now. And I looked at the list, never seen it before. I looked at the list and I read it and I said, I agree with you. I agree with you so much that everything on this list we've already done years ago. So rather than start implementing solutions to problems that aren't easily identifiable or well-defined, we have to ask the question, first of all, what are we hoping to accomplish within the balance of our criminal justice system? What are we hoping to do with the application of laws or legislation that keeps everybody, the system intact, but also our community safe? And the community safety is what's suffered most as a result of these legislative changes. Prop 47, if you don't remember, was passed in 2014. The ballot title for Prop 37 was the Save Neighborhoods and Schools Act. It did nothing to make either our neighborhoods or our schools safer. It was the greatest mass decarceration movement by getting people released from state prison, which was the ultimate goal. And some of those people need to be incarcerated. Hopefully those people, while they're there, participate in programs and get themselves back in a good place. Prop 57 was the exact same thing on a different level about redefining some of the sentences that were people were incarcerated for, again, intended to release people from prison early. And I'm a big believer in grace, something this church, I think, is founded on. I'm a big believer in giving people second chances. I mentioned some of the programs that we have within our Orange County jail system that we are incorporating. And all those are great as long as the other half of that relationship, the person who needs to participate, embraces those opportunities and gets themselves back in a good place for the benefit of all of us. There are, unfortunately, some people that do need to be behind bars for the benefit of the community. And we saw one of those you referenced recently that took 2 police officers' lives in Omonte was somebody who rightfully should have been probably back behind bars and for the benefit of the community. All that said, you have to be reasonable. And I think everything we do, whether it's with our children, whether it's with our community, whether it's in policing reform, starts with one simple question. What are we hoping to accomplish here? We have to have some end state, some end goal of what we want to see, what success looks like if we do these things. If we focus in that manner, you can define the process much better and what you're hoping to get to and what the off-ramps can be in dealing with homelessness and social issues, for example. That's the question we ask. What are we hoping to accomplish when we're dealing with those experiencing homelessness? And we have changed and morphed in our strategy in doing that. Here's a great example, Frank, that you didn't ask, but I'll use this. When you go back 10 plus years ago, maybe longer, we saw prostitution as a criminal offense. Young ladies breaking the law. We look at that as a human trafficking issue now. Yeah. We don't look at it as young ladies breaking the law. We look at them as now young ladies who need to be saved from an environment that they are being subjected to. And we've turned a tremendous corner in how we have solved this problem. So much so that their controllers, their pimps, won't come into Orange County because they're afraid that they'll be identified and taken into custody for human trafficking. That's a huge, huge I think, transition of where
That
we
is-
used to be.
That is outstanding.
One of my favorite stories was in one of our communities in which we provide policing services in North Orange County. 4 young ladies, 3 of them were adolescents, were under the age of 18, walked up to one of my uniformed deputy sheriffs and said, "We heard you can help us." It got them out of that human trafficking, sex trafficking trade. That's a huge tipping point for the credibility and reputation of policing when we have some of these young ladies who are entrapped in this criminal enterprise to see somebody and say, we've heard that they can help us. And that was a big turning point.
I want to interject here. Frank, will you allow the next person to come? We have a person in our congregation here today who worked with that population, and I know that she's rejoicing that now we're no longer punishing victims as it relates to prostitution and things of that nature. So I think that is wonderful. Carolyn.
Hi, thank you. Carolyn Coleman, I'm a member here at Second Baptist. And my initial question had to do with compassion in the Sheriff's Department, but after hearing the conversation just now, I'm ready to say Don Barnes for Sheriff. So you are addressing that. But I do have 2 questions. I was introduced to the wellness. There's a wellness program that's run through the Sheriff's Department, and it has to do with the response to mental illness. And you were saying that, and I don't quite see how that works in conjunction with the Sheriff's Department, because a lot of areas in Southern California are working on alternative methods to responses to mental health calls. But when I found out that the Sheriff's Department is running that program in Orange County, it was a bit confusing. And then my second part is, I'd like to know, where do you recruit your people? How many locals are part of the sheriff, and why do you recruit from the areas that you do?
Sure. So to answer your first question about the wellness, it's our behavioral health initiative and includes all these other facets in the community. You may be referring to the Be Well campus.
Yes.
That's in Orange. That was opened up. And let me go back a little bit further, and this may shock you. When you look at what we've dealt with in the last several years, and I've got a phenomenal team, it's actually been the Sheriff's Department at the tip of the spear leading these initiatives. And not because we want to own it, I want to get out of it. I want to get ourselves out of this environment. We should not be the responders to the community for those who are experiencing mental health crisis or those who are experiencing any of these other social issues, but those systems are not robust. And so if you think about this, I use the analogy of dominoes, not dominoes that Pastor Pitts wants to beat me in on September the 17th, I believe was the day. But in dominoes, when you're a kid and you stand them up on their end and you tip them over, we're domino 40. We're the middle domino. We're trying to build that domino stack backwards to have all these intervention strategies in place so I can get myself out of that stack entirely. So when you look at the Be Well campus, that's one iteration of this progression in providing services. There's a second Be Well campus coming online in South Orange County, and one more, hopefully beyond that we put in place in coastal or northern Orange County. And this is a place where we take people who are experiencing these crises in lieu of bringing them to jail. Over 500 people over the last year went there instead of coming into my intake in the jail, and it connects them to sustainable services and keeps them from coming back to jail.
Who staffs those centers?
I'm sorry?
Who staffs them? Do you have sheriff's deputies staffing those centers, or do you have social workers?
No, those are staffed individually, not by the Sheriff's Department. So there are clinicians and psychologists and workers that staff those, nurses, it could be whatever is necessary to staff those facilities. Those outreach programs you also mentioned, we have been in that business for well over a decade. The CERT or PERT or PET programs, the psychiatric evaluation teams, those we have been in that environment. We're trying to move, right now it's a co-responder model where we have a deputy with a clinician, where Huntington Beach just did a great job of really testing a new hypothesis, if you will. And now they have clinicians that are taking these 911 calls, they triage these calls over their dispatch, and they're sending clinicians without law enforcement out on a majority of these calls because they've demonstrated that is a better way. And what they have found is in doing that, they're able to stabilize them in community without ever going to a hospital or somewhere else. And most importantly, not coming to my jail. So when you look at what we're building, I was privileged to be on a commission a few years ago on these social issues, a subcommittee of the President's Commission. And in my testimony, I shared that we should not be the first person somebody sees as a symbol of government when they're in a mental health crisis or in some type of situation. Should not be somebody wearing a gun and a badge. They've got to get us out of this environment. Over time, the systems that should have been robust enough and in place were just not existent. Now we're building those systems out. Orange County's did a great job over the last 3-4 years of incorporating these strategies, and my hope before I leave this profession one day is it will be so robust that we don't ever have to respond to these calls anymore. There's other responsive elements that can respond to and triage these environments beyond the policing profession. And your second question, remind me real quick.
Your recruitment, where do
Sure.
you get your deputy?
Well, I'm recruiting right now. That's why I'm here. So my hope is that we have, we're looking for good people. And I don't care where they come from. I don't care how tall they are, when you ask me, when I started 30 years ago, the mantra at the time was the biggest, the strongest, the fastest. What I've learned over my career and my experiences, I want the smartest. I want the people who can communicate. I want somebody who can talk somebody into handcuffs if necessary. I want somebody who represents this profession and my organization specifically well, that contributes to the reputation we want. And I know from my experience with this church that there are people here that fit that mold. And people like them. I am colorblind. I'm gender blind. I'm sexual preference blind. I'm age blind. I want good people. And that is just the pot of people I want to be able to pick from. I'm going to give you one example of that real quick. I'm sorry, I missed your name again.
I'm Carolyn Tolman.
Carol, I had, many years ago, I used to meet with all of our recruits when they were getting hired, before they went to the academy. It's a very formal environment. They're dressed in a suit. They stand up, they introduce themselves, they give you a little background of who they are, military service, just graduated from a college or whatever it might be, and it's very formal, almost like you're standing off in front of a DI drill instructor. And about the 12th person into this room, this young lady stands up, she introduces herself, she says, I'm a manager at Coco's, and I heard the other recruits in the room, they don't really know each other yet, by the way, heard some of them kind of snicker. And I stopped. I said to the rest of the recruits, I said, I will tell you this, she is going to make the best deputy sheriff because she knows how it is to work with people, to serve, to deal with sometimes difficult people, and she knows how to problem solve. She has all the characteristics I'm looking for already in her life experience that is brought here. Put a different way, I don't need to have all military. I don't want all college graduate professionals. That's important, and hopefully if they came here and she came to us, that she's developed her education beyond that, because that's important too. But I want people that are representative of the community. That's what I'm looking for, people who represent the community in which we're privileged to live in and want to serve well in the community in which they are privileged to serve in uniform.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carol.
Take one more, or two more.
Three more. We got one gentleman over here.
And he's big, so we got to let him go.
Well, I know you don't want to listen to him because he said he's a Clippers fan.
Yeah.
I think for that reason we got to give him an opportunity.
I'm not sure. The Bible may not allow me to talk to him. We'll see. But we have a question up here. Do you believe a recent high school graduate has the maturity to handle the whims of society versus the ones that has been at least exposed to society's woes through extended education and life experiences? Basically, can a high school kid be a cop?
No. Well, I can't say no because the law requires peace officer now to be at least age 20. We don't hire that young. We're looking for a deeper life experience. We do have positions that are transitional that aren't peace officer positions that they can hire and kind of get the foot in the door within the organization to kind of grow into the profession. But I would generally not hire somebody that is fresh out of high school. Well, I can't hire somebody fresh out of high school because of the way the California legislature changed that, but I wouldn't have done that anyway. Yeah. That's too young. You have to, when you look at the perspective of what we do and it's very difficult to have somebody 20 years old responding to a domestic violence call or marital strife and talk about how they're going to help this couple who are distraught solve their problems. You can't prepare somebody for that through a training environment. There's some things that just have to be life learned in how to emote, how to connect, that you can't get through a 8-hour class. It has to be learned.
So you could hire a high school graduate if he was married in middle school.
Sheriff, thank you for being here. I don't know if you can hear me. Thank you for being here.
Pull the mic out and you can pull it out. No, pull the mic out. The mic, not the stand, the mic. There you go.
Thank you. I'm John Giberson. My wife and I, Scotty, recently found a home here at this church. We've been recently married, and the reason we're here, the friends and the music and the pastor, very inspiring for us. But thank you for being here, and thank you, Pastor, for inviting him. 2 questions. First one's easy. The Sheriff's Department is made up of many departments and thousands of people. Can you give us a description of the number of people in each department, the different functions? And secondly, can you speak just quickly to the political role that you kind of forced into playing here in Orange County?
Sure. First, the department is very large. It has 4,000 employees. I have 800 volunteers on top of that. Many of those volunteers serve within our custody operations and clergy and programs and other areas. You're right, it's very diverse. We don't have different departments, we have a lot of different divisions. And real quick, I'll just kind of cover them. If you look at we have 3 harbors we cover, so I have a Navy, we cover John Wayne Airport, we cover OCTA, I have 4 tactical teams, I have 5 helicopters, we do search and rescue operations. I mentioned the Fusion Center, which is our counterterrorism center. I have, if you know of an investigative unit, we have it. I have a cyber team. I have family violence. I have a great drug programs. I have 6 narcotics programs for drug interdiction and intervention. So we're a full-service organization. That's beyond the courts and our jails and the cities that we serve with direct policing. So it is a full-service organization. And thank you for asking that question. It gives me a little chance to brag on our recruiting effort. If you have a desire to serve and there's something that you want to do specifically within a policing organization, I guarantee we do it because we do it all. And what I love about this organization, if you have a desire to come and want to have a canine or be a school resource officer or whatever that might be, and you really drive your career towards developing towards that, there's a high probability you'll get to do what you strive to do within the Sheriff's Department. Your second question about the political environment, I'm probably the most unpolitical politician that you'll meet. I'm about as close to politically agnostic as you can get. I'll work with anybody who will work with me to help make this county safer. I have great relationships on both sides of the aisle. Our legislation, our legislators here, local representatives, I know them all. I get along with all of them. I don't think you can do this job successfully by being partisan. You have to be able to build bridges across the aisle and find commonality in which you can get things done. Some of the issues that I've had challenged with were during COVID. I think that was a very difficult time. We navigated that, in my opinion, very well within the county. There were a lot of people that were upset that I didn't arrest people for not wearing masks, and that's just not something that I saw as a policing function. What we didn't get credit for was how well we were able to work with people to get them compliant when necessary with some of these issues. So I'm proud of the way we navigated that. By the way, we had much better outcomes in a lot of other urban areas by not having to be very aggressive and over the top with a policing function, which I did not see that was ours. So I think from the political environment, I'm about as apolitical as you can be. I don't think you can be far right or far left and get anything done. You have to look at the middle and find people who are, if you get down to the extremes, if you eliminate the extreme issues that we talked about, and Pastor Pitts and I discussed some of these, I won't regurgitate what those are, but some of those are very extreme. And I use the bell curve, remember statistics, the 2 standard deviations from the norm, the 2.5% on both sides of the bell curve. I don't want to say this negatively, but I don't care about those people. because there's nothing I can say to satisfy them. And they're on both sides. 95% of the people in the middle I can work with. And you find that those people all want the same things. They want to make sure that that crime is low, that people are accountable, they're treated respectfully, their kids can go to school. All the things they want are exactly the same, regardless of whatever race or demographic or socioeconomic status they represent. We all want the same things, and that's the environment we should be working towards in Orange County. And it's difficult because Orange County is very affluent. Housing prices are going out of control. I don't have answers to that other than it's putting tremendous stressors on the social environment which we're operating. It doesn't help the homelessness issue when people can't afford to be housed. When I was on the commission to end homelessness a few years ago, one of the questions that we had 10 initiatives that came out, and I asked my peers on that board, in my opinion, there are two very clear missing initiatives. The first, what stopgap do we have from keeping people from becoming homeless in the first place? What can we do to subsidize or some way have some contributing factor that'll help keep people stay housed? Because anybody knows that when you lose a lease or get evicted, your chances of getting into another lease is dismal, because people won't risk on you because of your past history. So investing in keeping people housed in the first place, or not feeding this population with more homeless people, is really imperative. And I'm a firm believer in focusing on our foster care youth. Those who age out of a foster system, who become adults and are ill prepared for adult life because they haven't been set up for that. Many of them become sex trafficked in their lives and have significant challenges. So those two populations are very endearing to me that we need to focus on to make sure that we have a more robust system of stopping feeding the system on the front end so that we can have lesser on the back end.
And it just kind of shows how policing bleeds into other areas. So we have Dominique and we have Vivica, and we have another question there. And I'm going to try to get more succinct in our responses and in our questions.
Yes.
Go ahead, Dominique.
How you doing, Sheriff? Thanks for being here. So originally I was one of the individuals who did come to get my tickets expunged, but after you made that statement, I got a couple questions for you. So after the new Supreme Court ruling regarding CCWs, I seen that you posted on your Instagram, which was a very, very transparent statement, and was pretty interesting and good to read. One of my questions to you, as a resident of this community here, I want to know, what is the biggest challenge of carrying every day? And also, what is policing interactions, what do those interactions look like when policing, they know that you do have your CCW and different things like that?
So the first question, the challenges that we face every day?
Yeah.
I think, well, I can't answer any one. I can tell you my concerns, not only for our county, but as a nation. And this is not to get, hopefully not really uber political, but from a Homeland Security perspective, the lack of security at our border causes me tremendous concern. This is not an anti-immigration statement, but when you have a porous border where 280,000 people are coming over, many of them unknown, it causes me tremendous concern on who's getting in this country who may have ill intent. I also am very concerned about the cyber environment. Cyber hygiene is very important, and we should all be self-aware. You don't have to be robbed at the ATM anymore. You can be robbed by Russia, right, from across the planet with some of these things that how cyber bad actors operate. And then of course our drug trafficking issue. Fentanyl is probably the one thing that is causing me the most concern. My crime lab, by the way, internationally accredited crime lab, was the first crime lab west of the Mississippi that recognized the presence of fentanyl. And we have been, this is 7 years ago, and I've been screaming from the rooftops about fentanyl since then. And we are going to lose an entire generation if we don't, first of all, educate our kids about the risks of drug experimentation, because it's not like the Cheech and Chong era where I grew up, where you could, have a very low THC, marijuana, and now it is almost everything coming into the possession of our kids is either pure fentanyl or laced with fentanyl. And if you don't know what fentanyl is a opioid synthetic. It's 50 times more potent than heroin, and it is exponentially killing kids. The cartels south of the border are making pills, clandestine produced pills that look like OxyContin, oxycodone pharmaceuticals that have no pharmaceutical quality in them. They have only fentanyl, and they are killing kids, young adults at an exponential rate. I'm sorry, your second question was?
The second question was, how are police interactions knowing that someone has their CCW?
So we actually have a training course that we put out for law enforcement in Orange County. A CCW, for those who may not know, is a carry concealed weapons permit. As the sheriff of Orange County, I have the responsibility of evaluating those who apply for those permits. I've issued almost 18,000 of them, most of them since I've been in office in 3 years. I'm a firm believer in the Second Amendment. And the case that the gentleman is referring to was a Supreme Court case out of New York, referred to as the Bruin decision, which eliminated the requirement for a good cause statement. California required you to have a good cause to be issued a CCW permit, and now because of the Supreme Court decision, that good cause is no longer required, which means as long as you satisfy the conditions to receive a CCW and don't have any prohibitive prohibitions against having a gun, like being a convicted felon, you will get a CCW permit in Orange County. And about the encounter, we actually have the training that we give to law enforcement that when they encounter somebody who is in possession of a CCW, this is how they should expect to treat them and what they could or should expect out of the individual in that interaction. And anybody possessing a CCW in Orange County is taught how to interact with law enforcement if they are in possession of a firearm so that they make themselves known. And I think it's so prevalent at this point in Orange County that I think most every peace officer has probably encountered at least one or many people that have a CCW, if they do, and we've had no issues regarding our CCW program.
That's good. So I am awaiting my interview, which is going to be November 2nd, I believe. So I'm not gonna name drop you and say that I know you. You're one of my good friends, right?
Just don't tell them you're a Clippers fan. You'll be fine.
Well, good evening. My name is Vivica, and I just want to say I thank you for coming here and allowing us to be able to even have this moment with you. You said a few things tonight that I will just ask my questions real quickly. You just made a comment as far as being supportive of the Second Amendment, and I'd like to know if that extends to assault weapons. You mentioned some of the other things, but what is your opinion on just regular people having assault weapons? The second question I have is that you also made comments about the African American community is about 2% of Orange County. I'd like to know what the percentage that are incarcerated.
Sure.
And my last question with that is based on inmates. I know there's a lot of programs, and I applaud Pastor as always as far as being a part of the program, and I've actually worked with law enforcement myself in the past. But I'd like to know what programs Orange County offers for inmates, because we know that without something, they are likely to repeat, and then a lot of them, once they come out and they're a felon, they are banned from so many different things. So what programs do you have that actually help people with felony records or just people who have been incarcerated?
So before you answer that, you need to know that she is the valedictorian for her graduating class just last month. So these are very deeply thought out questions. Come on, let's show some love for our valedictorian over there.
I can tell that by the quality of the questions that were asked. So the first question regarding Second Amendment and support, I'm not an advocate for or against assault rifles. The law determines who can have them. I'm not arguing that it should be lessened or more strict. It's been, statistically speaking, when bad things happen with somebody in an assault rifle, there's this prohibition against all of them. It's a blanket, get rid of all of them. So I'm not going to say that I am against assault rifles. I'm against assault rifles not being in the hands of people that shouldn't have them. I think we need to look at who should not possess any firearm, assault rifle or otherwise. And in California, you can't really, there's only certain weapons you can possess in certain formats. So I'll be honest with you, I am a gun enthusiast. I shoot guns competitively, but there are responsibilities that go with that as well. And I think we should focus on the responsibilities of gun ownership more than anything else. For example, making sure your guns are locked, appropriately stored, while at home so that kids can't experiment with them, because they oftentimes will do that if they have access. So I think there's a balance between all of those things. Your second question, just to give me the topic, I'll remember what it was.
The percentage of African Americans.
So that's a
who are-
great question. So I actually was on a panel with the California Policy Institute, I believe it was, and one of the gentlemen, and that was brought up. And the question that was brought up, the manner was brought up, was Orange County, California, my jail. The black population is 2% of Orange County, but incarcerated black males represent 6% of my jail population. And I'm a pretty wise guy about anticipating questions. And I said, you're absolutely true, that is correct. But what you didn't know in the research is that 2/3 of those incarcerated black males are not Orange County residents.
Right.
They're from areas outside of Orange County who come into the county, commit their crime, and get caught. So if you look at the percentage of Orange County residents versus the incarcerated, it's actually equal 2%. The other 4% are not from Orange County. And I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that I have full faith and confidence that we do not have members of this black community going to other counties committing crime. I just don't believe in my heart that that is something that represents the fabric of our community. So when you look at the demographics that we have, it's actually completely in line with the population. And your last question was?
The programs.
Programs. So I mentioned some of the programs that COVID put us on a little bit of a hiatus when it came to program development, because they had to close down a lot of the access to the jail, and we're building some of those programs back. But I mentioned some of the vocational training I want to bring back into the jail for automotive maintenance or whatever programs we can bring in. And I have full support, by the way, from those industries. I'm going to give you a little peek. Well, I can't give you a peek under the tent of what I hope to accomplish because this is televised, but I'll put it out there anyway. Bringing these trades back in. And trade schools don't really exist anymore, and they're very difficult to get into. If they were, you have to be sponsored in to get into them. So when you have welding, for example, I have that industry wants to come and help me with welding classes to teach people to weld. Electrical, plumbing, the contractors for framing, all these people have an interest in coming in and building out these skill sets. I have a self-interest in this, I'll be honest, because I do believe if we can build this system out and get these systems working within our custodial facilities, my hope, quite honestly, is to build modular homeless housing with these trades. Start building modular units for homeless housing and like mobile home units that you can put back out in a public space, and start building out a housing inventory by using this labor skill set in a way that when they leave here one day, right, go back into these trades at a prevailing wage and have an opportunity to break the cycle of incarceration and never come back. And I'm working on programs also on for women as well. It has to be inclusive on both sides. So anybody who wants to participate will make that work. And I do have one thing that I think I'll focus probably more on the women who are in my care is I was at a program. We have a great resource outside of the jail called Project Kinship in Santa Ana. They transition into this supportive structure. One of the jails I'm building in Irvine is a 384-bed reentry facility for people who are transitioning out of custody to hopefully get them into success. And I just got a $2 or $5 million grant, I can't remember which one it was, to build out a post-custody reentry facility for people to go to for sustained programming after being released, which I think is important as well. But one of the programs they had at Project Kinship was they had a silk screening station. They were making T-shirts. Yeah. And I asked the question from the gentleman running it, supervising it, I said, could you emulate this in a custodial environment? He said, yeah, if you buy the equipment, nominal investment, we can teach anybody how to do silk screening. And I think if we were to do that, we could do, the county workforce is large. We could print T-shirts for every function that we have, every project that we do, every outreach effort for the community. They can do these silk screening and create T-shirts and hopefully leave with an opportunity for some employment post. I want to share one last thing with you, and this is one of my favorite stories. The music facility, which is in Irvine, is temporarily closed. That's where we're building these 2 new facilities, that reentry facility. Prior to closing it, the deputies there, They put the seed money in to buy all the equipment you need for a barista, basically a Starbucks. They bought everything and put the investment into there, and they trained young ladies to be baristas. And the staff would go and they'd buy a cup of coffee. It was like an enterprise fund. They'd pay for the coffee, it paid for the supplies, and these young ladies would make and serve these coffee drinks. And it was everything, the lattes and the whatever they make. I'm just black coffee general. I don't know what these foofy coffees are like. But they, one of these young ladies got released from our custody and went and applied at a Starbucks, and they hired her. And within immediately, the manager goes, "Where did you learn how to do all this?" "Well, I just got released from jail, and they taught me how to do these things there." You know what I love about that? The local Starbucks started calling and saying, "Hey, when you get somebody ready to be released, can you please let us know? We'd love to hire them." And that is where this relationship with the community comes in. And I have, when you talk about influence, I have a huge network of influence of affluent people that run businesses and trades. And they've already told me, if you do this, if you build this system out, we will risk a little bit on these people and give them opportunity to get back in the community and have a job, which is, as you said, is the greatest barrier and probably the greatest inhibitor to success, and the greatest contributing factor to recidivism is access to sustained employment and sustainable systems.
Are there living wages? Are they getting living wages within Orange County?
Generally speaking, the trades that we're talking about oftentimes union represented or have prevailing wage jobs that go with them. They wouldn't bring an individual in who might have been in my care and say the prevailing wage for this job is, they're going to treat them like an apprenticeship, if they can get fully certified in one of these areas. For example, automotive maintenance. I think there's 6 different certifications for automotive maintenance. If we can satisfy that while they're in my custody and they walk out and go, "Here's all my certifications, I can start working for you right now," that's a highly desirable applicant when you realize I don't have to put all the investment into them to get them up to the skill sets necessary to perform those functions. And I'll go anywhere that will prevent the opportunities, whether it's air conditioning or whatever, if I have the chance. And what the benefit for me, if you know AB 109, which was state prison realignment, it happened in 2011. They call it the 3 nons: non-serious, non-sex, non-violent offenders that get housed in jail in lieu of state prison. I have people in my care who are sentenced to multiple years, 5 years, 7 years. And jails, by the way, are not designed for long-term incarceration. They're designed for short-term stays while going to trial or for less than a year. So I have these people who are there. It is because they're in for non-serious offenses, it's the greatest population to focus these programs on, because I'm going to have them for a while. They're not going to be that transitional population that comes in on a regular, recurring basis. We have them for some time, and during that time we can get them through these programs because we know that they're going to be here 2-3 years. My hope would be that the courts might show them a little grace. If they successfully complete one of these programs and maybe have an employment opportunity, they might change their sentence or modify their sentence to give them an opportunity to go back and into employment if that opportunity exists.
That's great. There's a question on the board that I can't see. If someone would read it or grab a mic and read it. Can you see that?
I can see that. So the question is the Kurt Reinhold case. He was homeless. He was in one of our contracts. He's in San Clemente. There's an interaction with members of my behavioral health team with him. It resulted in a physical altercation that ultimately resulted in the death of Mr. Reinhold. I'm not going to, other than that, that is in litigation, so I'm not going to go into the details of that case. The question ends with, how are police addressing training for minor offenses? And we train robustly for de-escalation, for how to intervene, how to talk people down. That training was there. And I'm not going to go into the environment in which Mr. Reinhold's interaction took place. That is obviously not an outcome that we would ever want to have happen with a member in the community, but that is something that we had worked on before then, and we are working on since then. And I think there's one more question here from
One more
Derek.
question.
How is Orange County Sheriff's Department adjusting to create a project and project a positive mindset that overcomes the negative experience within the organizations? I'm not quite sure I understand what you mean by the question. Adjusting to create a positive, protect a positive mindset that overcomes a negative experience.
So I think what they're asking is there have been negative experiences that people have had with law enforcement.
Sure.
What is law enforcement doing to help undo those negative experiences?
Sure. So let me tell this story. The negative experiences that oftentimes make the news are not demonstrative of the majority of interactions we have with the community. I think, and don't hold me to the statistics, but I think it's about 384,000 interactions with the public in last year, and very, very few of them, first of all, ended up in an application of force, which is a positive thing. We have one of the lowest applications of force per capita or per interaction with the community, but the bad ones always tend to make the news. So I don't think that's completely representative. I do know that we have, we strive to always serve well, and when we miss it, we own it. We don't make excuses for it. And so I think when you look at any organization and leadership within an organization, you want to know that if there's something done wrong, you identify it, you look into it or investigate it, you hold people accountable when necessary, you implement positive policy change, training, experience, whatever that might be, which I think people would expect. I'll summarize it this way. If you look at when I hired in the Sheriff's Department 30 years ago, and I went to range qualification monthly, I was trained to unholster, shoot 3 times at a target, snap down, and just do this, and it was all about proficiency of hitting a target. We don't do that anymore. California requires 1 qualifying score a year. So in January of every year, every deputy has to have a 70% qualifying score, and every month after that, it's training. You can go through one of our range qualifications and never fire your weapon. Follow me here. This is firearms training. You can go through one of our firearms training and never fire your weapon and satisfy the training conditions. It's based on the threat that's being perceived by the deputy. It's based on what we're training to do. It's based on verbal commands, which we never did before when you unholstered and just shot at a paper target. Now it's Sheriff's Department, don't move. Sheriff's Department, don't move, cannot be misinterpreted in any other way. Hands up is not a good command if you're holding a gun down here or have something that's not identifiable. Sheriff's Department, don't move. And you work the problem from there. So I love the way we changed our training because it's more realistic. It's designed for an outcome that's desirable, which is not having an application of force, not just shooting a gun because you're trained to do it. So I think when you look at what we're hoping to accomplish and being contemporary and innovative and maybe a little bit ahead of the curve, we've got to get out. We have to break the old mold. That old mold of, well, that's the way we've always done it, and look at how can we do things different that get us to a more desirable outcome that serves the needs and meets the expectations of the community we serve in a way that doesn't create harms while we do it. And I think that's probably my hope, and I think the way we're leading this organization today, not just me, but the many people who I work with, that's the direction we hope to go, and hopefully restore, when necessary, a reputation that's positive, or whenever possible, represent and serve well along the way.
Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give Sheriff Don Barnes a round of applause.
Thank you.
This has been great. I am so grateful and thankful. There are so many other things we could have gotten into and talked about, but I think we had a nice, comprehensive view of what you do, how you do it, and how we can partner with you. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Rich.
Until we meet again, I hope to see you soon. Peace.
Thanks, Evan.